Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm doing my December wrap up and I had a really good reading month this month. It was probably the best I've ever had. Well, no, I know for a fact it was the best I've ever had since I joined BookTube. I read 14 books, which is quite a lot. My average is normally like 8 books a month, so this is pretty good for me. I was really happy about it and I finished an entire series, so we will talk about that once I get started. But if you enjoy this video, please leave a like and please subscribe. It really helps my channel, and I'm going to talk about the books not in the order that I read them, but just in the order that I think is most interesting. So first I'm going to talk about the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I read all 3 books this month, and it is a fantasy series. It is very complex to try and describe. Every so often, every like few hundred years, there's huge natural disasters that occur all across the world and kind of restructure society and restart culture and everything for the people on the planet. And also in this world, there are people called origins, I think that's how you pronounce it, and they can control rock and stone, and that is like the most basic explanation of their power. And our main character is one of these people, and both of her children also are. However, her husband is not, and these origins are feared and hated by most people because people blame them for the 5th seasons that occur, even though in reality they are actually stopping these 5th seasons from occurring even more commonly than they already do. So her husband kills her son and then runs away with her daughter, and then we follow our main character as she tries to reunite with her daughter. I had really high hopes for this series and I did really enjoy it. I gave all 3 books 4 stars. However, I expected this to be all 5 stars and like a new favourite series, and it definitely wasn't that. It took me until about halfway through the first book to really kind of get invested in the story and really get into it, and I'm not sure if that was because of the writing style, because this book switches between first, second and third person, so it is quite jarring at first, and that's why I think I should recommend that if you're going to read this series, maybe binge read it the way I did, because by the time you're in the 3rd book, I didn't even notice like the second person perspective or anything like being any different because I was kind of used to it. But whereas I think if you read the first book, then waited a month, and then read the second book, then waited a month, it would probably be more jarring to jump back into that writing style every so often, you know what I mean? But what I thought was quite interesting about this series is that the characters are not very likeable. It is very similar in this way to the popular characters, where you understand their motivations and you understand why they're hurting people, but you don't like it and you don't necessarily like them. So I think that's quite an interesting way to have characters, and like, I don't know, it's different than, you know, always supporting your main protagonist, and I quite like that. I think it's something different. The way everything comes together at the end of the first book was really cool, and I did see like, I don't even know if you would call it like a twist. It's just kind of a reveal, and I did see it coming. But I really enjoyed it anyway, and once it actually was confirmed, I was like, yep, I knew what was going on. But yeah, I really did enjoy it. The second book, however, again, it took me a while to get invested in the story. It was about over halfway through before I really started to enjoy it. And I did really start to care about the characters more in this book though, which was good, because I felt in the first book, even when I did get into it, I didn't really care about the characters, and it's probably because of that way where I just said that they're not really likeable. But in the second book, I did start to really care about the characters a lot more because I spent more time with them, so that was good. I also liked the magic system in these books, and in the second book, in my notes, I wrote that I liked that it wasn't too complex. However, that changes in the 3rd book, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I liked that we learn about the magic system along with the characters. So in the second book, I generally did think, okay, this is quite straightforward, it's easy to get your head around. And then the characters are also like discovering their powers along with the reader, so that's always good. 3rd book, which is the Stone Sky. At this stage in the book, I felt like I went into too much explanation of the magic, and I didn't personally feel like I had to go that in depth with it. I kind of skim read bits of it because I was like, I understand how her powers work and I understand what she's doing, so I don't really need all these like super details, you know what I mean? But I also felt like the pacing in a 3rd book was a little bit off compared to the other 2. The other 2, I was, even when I wasn't super invested in the story, the pacing was still really good. However, in this one of the perspectives is really far back in history, and it's kind of a history lesson of how the world came to be and how the 5th seasons came to be. And although it was interesting, I personally don't think it really added much to the story, and I felt like it kind of dragged the story back, because when I was in these chapters, I just wanted to get back to the present day. So I did still really enjoy the 3rd book, but I didn't really love it with my expectations, and I did really enjoy the series, but again, I didn't love it with my expectations really, but I would still highly recommend it if you're into fantasy. I would not say it's a good fantasy for beginners, but if you are into adult fantasy and you've read quite a lot of different series, this is definitely an interesting and fresh take on the genre. Next, I'm going to talk about Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, and this is a thriller, and we are following a journalist who goes back to the small town that she grew up in. She currently lives in Chicago. She goes back to that small town to investigate the murder of 2 young girls, and the story obviously goes from there. I don't want to tell much more because it is a thriller. What I loved about this book, so I found this book so addicting, I genuinely could not put it down. I think I read it in like one day. The atmosphere is so incredible. So because it is like a small town, Gillian Flynn really gives you like those small town feelings, and it feels so suffocating and so claustrophobic because Flynn gives names to every single character that the main character meets. Because she grew up in a small town, everyone knows everyone and everyone knows each other's business and everything like that. And it really just highlighted the small town feeling and really made you feel paranoid with the journalist, because everywhere she went, people were watching her, people knew what she was up to, people knew her backstory, and our journalist has a really tragic backstory, and this book really deals with her family trauma and how that interconnects with this current day case. And I don't want to say much more, but the two are very much interconnected, and it was just a really incredible thriller. I haven't read that many thrillers, but I just absolutely love this. I also love Gone Girl, and I think this is just as good as Gone Girl. It was so interesting and just captivating. I could not stop reading, to be honest. I just love how Flynn as well writes really realistically evil women, and their motivations and the things they do aren't like, you know, some evil witch from, I don't know, some fantasy story. Like, they're understandable and also just like crazy. I don't know, I just really enjoy how she writes women, and I just really recommend this. If you've read thrillers, obviously I haven't read that many, but I didn't think this was too predictable, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read, or the next one I'm going to talk about, is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, and this was Anne Frank's diary that she wrote while in hiding in the Netherlands during World War II. She was a young Jewish girl, and her family and some family friends all hid in an attic, and eventually they were discovered and taken to a concentration camp, and then her father was the only one that survived, and he discovered her diary, and it was then published. So this is obviously a very heavy book, but it also isn't in a way, because Anne Frank describes, what I really like is that she describes mundane life in the attic, and she talks about the food they have, the conversations that are going on, the arguments between the people living in the attic, and just a little daily aspects of life. And she also stays very hopeful, which really is heartwarming, I suppose. She also has kind of a romantic relationship with Peter, who was a family friend that was also hiding in the attic with her, and with his parents as well. And the way that she talks about the future and her relationship with him and everything is like really nice, but then it's also really sad because you know that none of them survive. So Anne is also very honest, and she always admits her faults. She's very self-aware, and she has arguments with her family. Her and her mother don't get on very well, and she's very brutally honest about it, and very self-aware of like when she's being selfish or vain, or when she was incorrect in an argument. And I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting to read, and I definitely think this like belongs on like the classic bookshelves, because it just really gives you an insight into people's lives during World War II that textbooks and stuff cannot really give. And like historical fiction as well, obviously it is from the present day, like looking back, but this is like in the moment, like someone's diary, and I just think it's really interesting. Next, I'm going to talk about The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and this is an American classic about a young boy who runs away with a slave who wants to be free, and they have some adventures and they get into some wacky situations. I really respect the message that Mark Twain is trying to portray to what at the time would have been younger readers about abolitionism and anti-slavery, and his morals that he's trying to give to his readers through the story. However, I just don't think this book is very interesting to read now. Obviously, it's very well known that it has a lot of racial slurs because of the time period it was written. I'm not talking about that. I just think that the actual storyline itself is not that interesting, and I found it very frustrating at times, because the Huckleberry Finn and then Tom Sawyer also comes into the story in like the last third are obviously children, and they are acting like kids, but it's very frustrating because Tom Sawyer especially, he's just making everyone's life harder just for his own amusement. And I don't know, I just found it frustrating to read, because this slave is trying to escape. It's a very serious topic, and then Tom Sawyer is like making fun and games out of it. And I guess it is like, it's supposed to be a light-hearted book, and at the time it was written for kids, or like middle grade, I guess we would call it now, like that kind of age range. But I don't know, I just don't think this is actually that good to read in retrospect, and I kind of struggled to get through it. I actually ended up listening to the audiobook mostly. Another book that I read this month was Zami, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde, and she was a black lesbian growing up in New York City. She's born in the 1930s, and this chronicles her life from the 1930s up until about the 1960s. She walks us through her life and how being a black lesbian affected her and shaped her into who she was, through the choices that she had to make and the experiences she lived through and everything like that. What I loved about this was that her writing, she was a poet, and her writing was very descriptive but not flubbery, and you could definitely tell that she was a poet. She had an amazing way with words. Just the way that she wrote everything, I could easily visualise everything she talked about. I could feel every emotion she talked about, and she talked about all of her emotions. She laid everything out on the table. This felt like a non-fiction at times, I thought, just because everything flowed so nicely. There was no real like facts or figures or anything. It was just very much her personal experience as a black lesbian at the time, and she was just extremely honest and forthcoming about every aspect of her life. Her relationship with women, she laid it out all on the table, which I thought was fascinating, and she held nothing back. And she talks about how she was very much an outsider at the time, and she feel the way that she describes being a lesbian in New York City at the time, it doesn't seem like she actually had much discrimination put against her for that, but she definitely was one of the few black out lesbians in her social circles. So she talks about that and how that affected her and how that shaped her, always being surrounded by white women, and I just thought it was fascinating. I definitely think it's worth a read. Like I said, it reads like a non-fiction, so it's super easy. No, it reads like a fiction, so it's super easy to read and get into and just really explore the time period and, you know, being a black lesbian at the time. So definitely recommend this to anyone that is interested. And if you are wanting more non-fiction, I think this is a really good autobiography to read because it is informative because of who she is, but also just like a really interesting and fun at times read. I also read some Shadowhunters books by Cassandra Clare this month, surprise surprise. So I read books 4 to 6 in the Mortal Instruments series, and I also read the Bane Chronicles. So first of all, the Mortal Instruments obviously is books 4 to 6, so I don't want to give any spoilers or anything, but the second half of this series definitely felt like it was Simon's arc, and more than anyone else, he was kind of the main character. Well, not really the main character, but it is like his arc. His character goes through so much, develops and changes and everything, and I thought it was really interesting because I did not expect it. Especially book 4, it was pretty much like Simon's book, I thought. So that was pretty cool because I do like Simon. I loved all of the Jason Clary moments. I shipped them so unashamedly, I don't know, I'm trying to say a word I can't say, hard. I just love them as a couple. I think it's really fun, and this series is just like perfection for like romance, like YA romance. What I didn't love was Alec in this book. I thought he was annoying and his storyline was the weakest. I don't want to talk about it because like spoilers or whatever, but I just thought that if you read it, you'll know. I thought the choices he made was terrible, and I did not like his character in this book at all. The Bane Chronicles is like a short story collection all about Magnus Bane, and I thought the very first story in this book was the worst of them all, and it made me question whether to even continue with the book. I read this first one, I was like, this is not going to be good. But most of the others were really good, so I wish that that first one was not first, because it just was not a good introduction to the story. But I enjoyed spending more time with all the characters. We see characters from the Mortal Instruments and from the Infernal Devices, so that was cool. However, I don't think I really enjoy Magnus as a main character that much, which makes me kind of nervous for when I read the Eldest Curses series, because he is the lead character of that series, and I don't think that he is the best as a lead character. I feel like he's better as a supporting character. This month I also read Cinder by Marissa Meyer, which is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles series, and it is a kind of sci-fi fantasy mashup retelling of the Cinderella story, with Cinderella, or just Cinder, she's known in this, being an android, I'm pretty sure. She's like half human, half robot. I thought this was like a fun, fast read, but it was nothing special. It didn't blow me away. I didn't like love it. It was just like an average, like fun YA book. I liked that it wasn't exactly just a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella. It was like, it had its own like twists and turns, and it deviated a lot from like the original story, but also kept like the key elements you would expect. So I did think that was kind of fun. The big reveal at the end of the book though was so predictable. Like basically from the very start, I knew what the twist was going to be. Like as soon as they start talking about it right at the start of the book, I just thought it was very predictable. But this was Marissa Meyer's first like debut novel, I'm pretty sure, so that's understandable, and it was really fun. And also I think that knowing the twist or whatever is maybe just kind of in the nature of retellings. I don't love retellings. I think that they're kind of lazy in a way, but I did think this was fun, and it was a fast read. I'm pretty sure I read it in like one day again, so I'm definitely going to continue on with the series, but it's not like a priority for me, but I do plan on reading the rest of the series. So those were all the books I read this month. Apart from I also read this ebook that Cassandra Clare sent out called We Jace You a Clary Christmas. I hate that name so much, it's so cringe, but it was just like some little extracts of like deleted scenes and like her rewriting some scenes from Mortal Instruments into JC's perspective and stuff like that. So it was cute, but I don't even want to talk about it. Like it was just cute. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and also let me know your thoughts on any of these books. If you've read it, I know that the 5th season especially like is very popular, so I definitely want to like talk about it in the comments if you have read it, or if you're thinking about reading it. If you have any questions, let me know. I can definitely answer it in like a non-spoiler way, whatever you want. And if you don't have anything to say but you want to leave a comment, just write a smiley face, you know, like 2 dots and a little curve thing, or do an emoji, whatever you want, whatever's easier. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.